Oh boy, where do we start? So, this is the PoE Beginner guide, guys. And I have to tell you, first of all, this is a game that you will never ever finish. That you will never finish learning about the game. You will never get to know everything. Myself, I've been playing for around 2,000 hours or so at this point, plus a lot of time spent outside of the game, making builds, doing the trading, and so on. So a good bunch of my gaming life has been spent on this game. And I have to say that I'm not nearly, close to the end. So this is something that is very different from most other games. Or probably this is unique to this, I don't know. But yeah, there's a lot of stuff to know, and this guide will certainly not cover even a tiny fraction of this. But I want to give you a little bit of an overview of what it's about and how to jump into the game. We have the new league releasing this Friday on June 19th. It's going to be called the Harvest League, and this is basically like a new season, and it also lasts approximately the same time, around 3 months every time. There's usually a lot of new content in a new league, and this is a very good time to start the game. So if you ever wanted to jump into PoE, then yeah, just go for it now, I guess, because it is a really nice ARPG, and D3 is slowly fading out, and we have to wait quite a while until D4. So PoE can fill out void for sure. And I certainly enjoy both games, but I know a lot of people have already switched completely, and yeah, this trend will just continue probably. So with that out of the way, you have to know that things work a little bit differently in this game compared to Diablo, for example. So in this game, you do have classes. There are 7 to choose from, but the thing is that the classes, they don't have their own skills. So this is one of the things that makes PoE so special. You can do pretty much anything you want on any class, on any character, and you can customize it to the max. So this here is the skill tree, and I know it does look very intimidating, especially to new players. The thing is, once you understand the system behind this, it's actually not that bad anymore. There's still a lot of things to learn, and a lot of optimizations especially that you can figure out later on. But yeah, the basic working of this is that each class starts on the same passive tree, and you start at a different point depending on which class you play. So for example, right now I'm playing a ranger, and this is kind of like predestined for like bow builds and so on. But you don't have to do this. You can also play melee, you can even play spells, you can do anything you want. And you just start here at this point, which is the ranger starting area. And for example, you have the duelist starting over here, and then you have the marauder starting over here, and so on. And each class has their own little starting spot, and we have the sign in the middle. And other than that, those classes, they have so-called ascendancies, which are essentially subclasses. And with this, you can specialize a bit more. So for example, again, with the ranger, you have something that typically buffs like bow or projectile skills. And you don't have to do this again, so you can also make them kind of viable for other stuff, but it depends a little bit on what you want to do. For example, this class I'm playing is a raider, which is the ascendancy, and this one is like a really speedy one, for example, so you get a lot of mobility and so on, but obviously not as much damage, not as much tankiness. And there's other classes that specialize more in those areas, for example. Also, the passive tree is not fixed, so you can change it at any time. It will cost you a little bit of currency, but it's nothing really crazy, especially once you reach the end game. You can quite easily afford a respec every once in a while, if you like, and you will not really be too sad about making a mistake here and there. You get some passive respec points for free anyway during the campaign, and later on you can just buy respecs, basically, and this is not really such a big deal. The way the skills work in this game is with those so-called skill gems. So here, skills are not given to you by your class or a level or anything, but you have to put them into your items. So there are skill gems and there are support gems. So here's a skill gem right now, for example. This is my main skill, which is called Split Arrow. And this is, I have to equip this one to even use my bow, essentially. There's a default attack, but it doesn't do anything. So you have to put this into your item, and this will give me the skill here on the bar, and then I can shoot it. And it looks like this, for example. It's very basic. It's like a multi-shot TH, and this is what I went with in the last couple of days, just to try to get back into the game again. I played this character here, so I just hopped in and blasted, and this was the result. Now for the support skills, they can either buff or change your skill in certain ways. So for example here, what I use is a Mirage Archer. So whenever I attack something, I will summon kind of like a ghost that will automatically attack stuff around me. So that's pretty neat, for example. Here's a Vicious Projectile support. This one is essentially just a damage buff. So you get like lots of physical and chaos damage increase and so on. And this build was using physical damage to scale it up this way. But there's also stuff that really changes the way the whole skill plays. So I can show you an example here. For example, we have a greater multiple projectile support. And this one adds 4 additional projectiles. So instead of those 9 projectiles that the skill actually does, we get like 13 now. So you see it's like a little bit more than before. And if I take this out again, it will be fewer arrows. So this is typically a support that you would use on a skill that has only 1 projectile, and you can split it into 5, but at the cost of a little bit of damage, for example. And other supports are, for example, Barrage here. So you can put this one in. And this makes it so that I shoot them sequentially, and I can like hit the same target with this. So this would look like this, for example. And you see that this is entirely a different skill now, almost. Even though I still have the same skill gem, I just put in this one support, and this changes the whole skill to this. And for example, you can also do Arrow Nova, which makes it so that I shoot one arrow to the sky, and it will fall down and then explode in kind of like an arrow explosion. So this looks like this, for example. And you see it goes like around in a circle. So yeah, this is just a few examples of the many ways that you can customize your character, customize your skills. And you can definitely do a lot of experimentation with this, as you can imagine. And on top of this, we have the passive tree. On top of this, we have unique items that can change things around entirely. There are not just passive skills that give you like a little buff. For example, it looks like this. These are like the so-called notables. They are like a little bit bigger, and then you have the small nodes, which are giving you smaller bonuses. And there's also the so-called travel nodes. So that's kind of the system behind the passive tree here. And typically you're going for a few key notables and certain key stones, which are the really big ones that look like this. And they typically change your character in a very certain way that you want to specialize on, typically. So this is a rather basic one, acrobatics, but there are other ones. For example, here it's point blank, which is also a very typical choice for bow builds. Gives you 30% more damage at the start of the movement, so when you have a target very close, but it deals less damage when you're far away. So this can change, the way you play, the way you build a character, and there's much more extreme examples of this. Especially this one here, Chaos Inoculation. So there's different damage types in this game. It's physical, cold, fire, lightning, and chaos. And this one makes it so that your maximum life becomes 1, but you're immune to chaos damage. And there's more ways than just stacking life to actually build defense. So obviously with 1 life you would be one-shot to everything, but the idea behind this is to stack energy shield instead, which is almost like a second life bar. And this is also like one way you can just stack up thousands of energy shield instead of thousands of life, and then you can use this and survive. It trivializes a lot of fights essentially at the cost of making your max life 1. So you don't even stack life at all, for example, and build a character entirely different way. Yeah, so this is essentially how you build those trees. So you try to reach certain big nodes, like something like this here, herbalism. Here's like Master Fletcher, that is like bow stuff, and here's like, for example, elemental damage stuff, and so on and so on. Here's critical hit damage and critical hit chance, and there's lots of stuff here. And in between you have also a little bit of variety. So here's, for example, something that benefits dual wielders or shield bearers. We have something like for channeling. There's cold damage. There is movement speed. There is resists. So there's a lot of stuff on this tree, but it's still kind of clustered into certain themes. So as I said, for example, here's the ranger area. So there's a lot of dexterity here, which is like one of the 3 main stats. And there's a lot of like bow and archer stuff here. And in between you have this other stuff as well. And for example, here is like the witch area. So we have a lot of intelligence and energy shield stuff. And we have lots of spell damage, spell crit, all kinds of things there with mana as well. So you can do like, pretty good spellcaster setups in this region of the tree. And then here we have, for example, the Marauder starting area, which is like the strength area. So there's like lots of melee stuff, tanky stuff, armor stuff, and also resist and all those kind of things. But as I said, these are like just very rough guidelines. But typically you always have things thematically grouped a little bit at least. So this kind of helps you out to understand the principle behind this whole skill tree a bit before you actually make a lot of builds or see a lot of builds, to finally understand more and more of the passive tree. So after this little excursion with the passive tree, a little bit more to the gems and the skills. So I've already showed you, how you can change the skill around, and there's like hundreds of skills and support gems in this game. So there's a lot of stuff you can do. And the way that this works, for example, is you also have these items, and they come with these sockets. So you have these 3 different colors. So again, like red corresponds to strength, and green corresponds to dexterity, and blue corresponds to intelligence. So as I said, it's also like thematically grouped in that way. So they have like certain stat requirements. For example, like a bow skill here, it says in the middle roughly, it requires level 72 and 159 dex. And being a ranger, it's not very hard to stack a lot of dex to use this one. But for example, a spellcaster build would have a little bit of a trouble. You'd have to go for the items that actually give you dexterity to even be able to use this. So these requirements do play a role, but typically if you want to use, for example, a skill, it's not really the biggest deal. But there's, for example, certain items that require like lots of investment into certain stats and so on, especially certain uniques. Yeah, and then those skills here, they are linked. So you can see this line between those gems, and this means that this is a 6-link item, which is the highest amount of links you can get, and also the highest amount of sockets you can get. On a bow, for example, you can get 6 sockets, and like 2-handed melee weapons is also 6 sockets. And then you have one-handed weapons, which are 3 sockets only. So the only other way to get 6 links would be in the chest armor. And then you have 4 and 4 and 4. And you can also get it on a ring and so on in certain cases. But typically you do most of your spells in those armor slots. And when you do more links, obviously you can add more support skills to that skill. So if this is like, for example, only a 5-link, so imagine that this one would not be connected. It would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 here. And then only those gems that are part of this chain will be will have an impact on the skill. So you put in a skill and then 4 support gems, and this one would be separate, and this could be another skill, or it could just be like a gem that you're leveling. So it wouldn't do anything, even though it's in the same item. So this is very important to actually make the setup strong, and this is something that you want to focus on. So you have to put those gems together in the right order, in the right colors, but it probably sounds more complicated than it really is, I have to say. So when you start the game and you start out with your first items, and you start out with like a 2-link or then a 3-link item and so on, and then you quickly get to like a 4-link, and this is kind of like the standard state of your build until you get lucky and find like a 5-link and eventually try to 6-link. There are ways to make items linked. You can also change the colors. You can essentially customize almost everything in this game with your items. Yes, a really big crafting system as well, but I'm gonna go into that at another point because it's not really relevant for starters. But what you can know is that, for example, when you start out, you will find certain they're called currency items, and these are typically like these orbs. For example, here we have an orb of alchemy. There's a chaos orb. Chaos orb is the standard currency in this game, so most items will be priced in chaos orbs. So there's like a kind of like a hierarchy between those currencies. So you can convert, for example, 3 orb of alchemies into 1 chaos orb, and then you can convert like maybe 15 chaos orbs into an orb of annulment, or you can convert 150 chaos orbs into 1 exalted orb. And these are kind of like average prices or so. So they change a little bit depending on the league and what drops are really common and so on. But there's kind of like these ballpark numbers that you can learn by heart over time, and then you understand how much one item is worth, if it's even worth picking up, and so on. And all of these orbs actually do something. They're not just currency, they're not just something you use to buy stuff, but they actually have an effect. For example, here we have a regal orb, upgrades a magic item to a rare item. So you make a blue into a yellow item, for example. So instead of only 2 stats, they can have up to 6 in most cases. And here we have a chaos orb, reforges a rare item with new random modifiers. So that's essentially just like a reforge. You just reroll all the stats on it, and here make a normal item into a rare item. So this is like a white to yellow. And yeah, then Exalted Orb, they are quite expensive because they add one extra modifier. So when you have an item that is like incomplete essentially, but it has, you know, like 5 good stats, but it has 1 open stat, you can throw this one on and you get an extra stat. So obviously this is rather expensive, and so on. So there's lots of stuff, and these are just like the basic currencies. And then there's like even more. There's like essences, for example, which got added in like a league or something like very long ago. And then there's fossils of crafting where you can kind of like specialize into crafting into like a certain area, something like, you know, resists or only cold rolls or only physical rolls, and so on and so on. So yeah, it's very extensive, and crafting is like its whole own game essentially. So there's a lot of stuff to learn about this, but this is kind of like the basics here, and then you have to have a little bit of an understanding of how this works. Here's the character sheet. So it looks like this. It shows you the character, your ascendancy, your stats, your level. Here you can see details to every single of your skills. So I have a bunch of skills here because I have a lot of stuff here. So my bow, for example, right now is just my split arrow. My chest is just my shrapnel blister, which looks like this. So it's basically like a sentry and they shoot automatically. But here they also have a life bar so they can die. And then I have lots of other skills that are not really linked to much else. So there's like supporting auras, for example, or heralds. So the way that auras work in this game is you can reserve your mana, and you see that the mana bar is almost entirely reserved, which means that this is blocked. So I cannot use my mana until this point, which is only 96. But for me this is fine because my attack build doesn't require a lot of mana, and I leech mana back really quickly. So I just shoot 2 or 3 times, but as soon as I hit something I get back to full mana. So yeah, I use all of my mana to reserve. This is very common, and typically you always try to, you know, get as low as possible while still being able to play a build. But obviously there's also builds that, you know, actually stack mana to the maximum and run around with like 10k mana, and then they have like crazy mana cost on their spells or something. So this is a thing. And here's like more details on the skills. You can see damage per second, chance to hit, attacks per second. You can see the damage, you know, split up by type, so physical, fire, cold, whatever. Chance to blind, and so on and so on. Number of arrows to fire. Yeah, so you get lots of details here, so this is really amazing. And for example, also the defense tab here is very important. Especially for beginners, the resists are important. So resists matter a lot in this game, and the game is balanced around you having max resists, which is 75%. So here they work a little bit like in Diablo 2, where each point of resist is 1% damage reduction to that type. So this means I take 75% or 76% less fire damage, cold damage, and lightning damage, and everything is balanced around that value in the end game. So this is something to keep in mind. Resists are very important. And especially when you're in like Act 6, which is when the second part of the campaign starts, you want to stack some resists. So make sure you cap out or close to cap out at least, and don't throw away those items that might not seem really great to you. The same goes for life. So life is very hard to come by, and stuff really hurts overall in this game. So you die a lot, especially as a newbie. And you know, even now, especially like when I go to the higher content, you get one shots, and that doesn't happen too infrequently unless you're stacking a ton of life and resist and defense like armor and damage reduction, and you know, there's all kinds of stuff. But even then people die. So this is just part of the game, and you have to be aware that this is one of the main mechanics. Resist is really important. There are many other layers of defense, but it is definitely the most important one for the start. So one thing I want to show you is when you actually start the game and you try it out for the first time, you will be selecting a league here. And here right now this is between the leagues because Delirium has just ended, and there's only standard. So standard is this non-season mode of Path of Exile, and with this you have like a permanent character. But most people are in the leagues. It's the same as the seasons in Diablo. Everyone, you know, waits for the new start to start fresh, and then you have this other option here, which will be called Harvest for the next league, and then you have to select this one and then go. But just for the sake of demonstration, I just go with this here, and then you can take the class here that you like to play. You type a name, and then you go. And then you will wake up here, and it's the same campaign for every class, so it's a 10-act campaign. It is rather long, and there's a lot of tips about it, so I might cover this as well in a separate video. But just for the start, I would suggest, try progressing your way through and explore the game a bit. It doesn't really matter if the first playthrough takes a little while. It can be done quite fast, so like record times of all acts, solo, self-found, starting fresh, I think somewhere like around 2 hours or so. But obviously these are like the super crazy pros and racers that can do that fast. And typical times for an experienced player is something like 5 to 8 hours. And for a newbie, I guess it will be 20 hours plus. So the first time, also myself included, this took me, I was playing for like 3 days or so. But this shouldn't really be so surprising, because you also spend a lot of time just learning the game, absorbing information, trying to understand how things, just reading gems, reading skills, there's lots of stuff. So obviously you're going to be slow, and you're not aware of any of the layouts, but there are actually patterns that you can follow, and you will slowly understand how the campaign works, what you have to do next, and so on. So this just comes with experience over time. After you've leveled a few different characters, you can also do it rather quickly most of the time. Anyway, so when you start out, you typically get a weapon here. So this just lies on the ground, so the starter weapon. In my case, it's a bow, and you can see already this is 2-linked. It has 5 to 13 physical damage, a little of crit, and so on. So these are the basic stats that this bow has. It always has this crit value, it always has this attacks per second, and so on. This is like part of the item. And on top of that, you will get all the other mods from blue or yellow item rolls. So when you start out, you talk to this guy here, and then some little event happens, and you kill this guy, and you will get your first gem. And you just put this in here, and you see it's automatically on my bar as well. And with this, you can already blast. So I got Burning Arrow here, which is like the starter skill. And then as you progress through the campaign, you will get some quests that will unlock more skills, and they will typically also give you a choice to choose a new skill. For example, you do like the first 1 or 2 quests here, and then you get like a few more skills to choose from. And all those skills that you can choose from, even if you don't take them, you can buy from the vendor in town as well. So stuff you buy at the vendor is very cheap usually, so it costs almost nothing. So it doesn't really matter if you experiment a little bit with those different gems and try to find a skill that suits you best. So one important thing that you need to know when you actually start playing the game is that first of all, you can always see the current quest on the map here. So there's a map, and right now I don't have anything explored, but it will be highlighted as like orange. So you don't see it here, but after the first quest you can see that on the map. So it kind of shows you the way, and you can follow around those directions from the map roughly. So it's not exactly the same, but you see that this points to the north, and also in this layout you kind of have to go to like the north, and it will correspond loosely to what you can see on the map here. So obviously the layouts are randomized, but this will help you out a bit to actually follow the right path and not get super lost. Just make sure you look for waypoints, so you can actually find these waypoints, and it will show like a little dot on these map icons here, or these zones, if there's a waypoint or not. If it's an empty one, it will not have a waypoint. So in some cases it can be really useful to avoid really big backtracking, because you have to do like an optional side quest, or the path actually splits into 2 areas and so on. So there are some situations like this. Also for your gameplay, there's one more mechanic that is really important. Those are the flasks. So you start out with some life and mana flasks. There's nothing special, but they help you out a lot, and they are very important. So especially later on, there's also utility flasks and some stuff that gives you like more damage and more movement speed and more defense and so on. And typically, especially once you're going faster and faster, you will have those flasks up permanently. So they consume a certain amount of charges, and then they recharge when you kill enemies. So yeah, later on, the game starts out really slow, but it just keeps going faster and faster, and eventually it will all become kind of like a T16 speed farming, or like GR100 speed farming meta. So this is kind of like what you can compare it to. In PoE, there's not really any kind of like high tier pushing content. There is hard content, but it's not like slow paced content. It's always typically fast paced. A map is usually not longer than like 5 minutes. And the really hard endgame content comes in the form of, you know, just really dangerous enemies that will kill you over and over, and you don't have infinite tries. And on top of that, you also lose XP, so you don't want to die, at least after the campaign. In the campaign, it doesn't matter, but afterwards, you do lose 10% of your level every time, so you kind of want to avoid those deaths. And boss fights are extremely good in PoE, and there's also extremely hard boss fights that, you know, only the craziest characters can even try, really. So this is where the end game is at. And as I said, those flasks do play a role. So make sure you use them, make sure you press them often enough. It is something that new players might forget quite easily, especially since you start out with those life flasks and so on. But especially later on with the utility flasks, you want them up all the time. So whenever you run around and kill stuff, you just press all your flasks usually, or most of them, and then you blast them one pack, and then run for a few seconds and you press them all again and so on. So this is rather spammy, but this is how the game works right now until this gets changed eventually, hopefully. And then you see your XP on the bottom here, so it says level 1, 10%, and then you can just watch your progress there, and every level will give you 1 passive point. As I said at the start, don't really worry too much. You do get some reselect points, and your first build is always going to suck unless you actually follow a guide, and even then you'll probably mess something up. So this is just how it goes. I can just recommend stack life a lot, because this will help you to just get through the game easier. Most of the trash can be quite dangerous in some cases, and typically it also dies almost no matter what. And then boss fights might be a bit long and so on when you don't have a lot of damage, but typically it's okay. So for example, here you can start out as a ranger with maximum life, and then there's percent maximum life and so on. So you can kind of go this path. Here's also the damage path. Maybe one last thing you should know about those stats here is that the PoE has a very clear system of how things scale with the wording. So this is a really big advantage here. And you have these rather huge damage values. You see this, for example, 15% projectile damage, and then all these small nodes can be like 10% projectile damage and so on. So obviously this kind of seems to scale up really crazy, but the thing is, this is all one additive category, kind of like additive damage in Diablo 3. And whenever it says increased, it's this additive category, and everything that is increased goes into one category. So for example, there's also increased critical strike chance, and like increased global critical strike chance and so on. So this will typically just be one multiplier as well. So if you go for something like a node like down here, for example, 50% increased critical strike chance with bows. So we have this 5% base crit with the bow, and then this will be multiplied by times 1.5 on a 50% bonus, so it will be 7.5, which is a pretty nice increase. But you have to see that, you have to stack a lot to actually get this 5% value to, like a higher value, like, 40, 50% or so. That requires a lot of investment, and it's similar with the damage buffs. Then there's also these more multipliers. So more are actually multipliers. So you saw this on the skill gem earlier, like the vicious projectiles that I showcased. That one said more physical damage, and this means that it's a multiplier. And in the same way, you have also reductions. So there's increased and reduced, which is additive. And then there is more and less, which are multiplicative. So this is something to keep in mind when you're looking at, comparing, especially skill gems. This is quite important. And also for the stuff in the passive tree, you might be thinking, wow, I'm stacking, like another 30% damage and so. But, typical increased damage values are somewhere between like 300 and 800%. So when you add like another 20%, it usually comes down to, something like 3% more. Like damage bonus. So I hope with this video I could show you a little bit of the basics of the game and how it works. As I said in the beginning, there's a lot of stuff, and I certainly can't cover it all here, but it should give you the basic understanding of what's happening, how the skills work, how the passive tree works, how the classes work, and so on. So I hope this helped you out a bit, and if you feel motivated to jump in, then go ahead. I can just recommend it. PoE is a great game, and it just keeps getting better. And I will also cover more beginner stuff soon, probably like going over the campaign a little bit to show you some tricks, and also what you need to keep in mind. There are certain quests you want to do, certain optional quests you don't want to do, and so on. So I'm gonna cover this, and then we just keep going from there essentially. So I'm gonna keep it covered, and I hope that you like this this overview here, and it's gonna help you. And otherwise, I'll see you guys next time.